Hi, Insiders. Welcome to today's talk about the Underground Subway. I'm pleased to introduce Justin Rivers, Untapped New York's Chief Experience Officer, who will be giving a whirlwind tour through parts of the New York City subway that we usually offer on our in-person experience, the Underground Tour of the New York City subway, and include some additional fun things that haven't made it on the tour yet. But Justin is always searching for new and fascinating things in New York City's history. So I'm going to let him take it away. Welcome, everyone. And just logistics, if you have questions, please feel free to send them in the chat. And we'll ask them to Justin if the timing is appropriate. Otherwise, at the end, we will have a Q&A in which you can raise your hand or continue typing in the chat any comments, questions. And that's it. So Justin, take it away.
Hello, how's everybody doing? Good afternoon. We're 12:01. So anyway, I defy you now not to have take the A train in your head during this whole presentation. But last minute I said to Michelle, we should be playing Take the A Train. And then of course, Michelle quickly delivers. Actually, cute little story about Take the A Train. A lot of you may know got its name literally from the directions that Duke Ellington gave to Billy Strahan when Billy Strahan was from Pittsburgh. He was a composer, and he was tasked with composing a song for Ellington. In 1939, he came to New York, and literally Duke Ellington said, to get to my house, you take the A train. And then the A train was fairly new back then, part of the IND line, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but nice way to start it off. And now it'll be in my head the whole time. Underground Subway Tour actually was the second tour I ever devised for Untapped New York, then Untapped Cities. So this is the tour that has gone through the most evolution, as Michelle has mentioned, since day one back in I think it was early 2016 when we put this together. And it's had 3 iterations, and this one, what we run now, is my favorite. So we're gonna go through it. We're gonna do some bonus material that you won't see on the tour. Some stuff I'll leave for the tour if you could ever join me. So actually, let's start with this shot, which is a shot from photographer Aaron Assis, who has joined us today, and who may be stepping in a little bit to talk about Union Square when we get there. But this is what the subway currently looks like now. Very empty. As a matter of fact, our subway ridership stats usually total people moved on any given weekday is usually about 5.6 million people. Right now, we're hovering somewhere right below 1 million and sometimes over 1 million. So subway ridership has gone down quite a bit on weekdays, which is all very good for stopping the spread of coronavirus. We have a total of 472 stations in the system and about 7,000 cars right now in rotation, which the MTA is painstakingly sanitizing almost every day, which I think is also an incredible feat for them. So this is another shot of a newer train. And so we had that was an older 1970s, 1980s model. This is sort of a newer, I believe this is the R train, Aaron, I think so. And one of the things we'll talk about at one point is the difference between the width of the train cars between the first system known as the Interborough Rapid Transit, and then the second and third systems, which we'll talk briefly about when we get there. But I'm going to start at the beginning. I never have this luxury on the tour. I used to start the tour this way, and I actually realized that the beginning of the tour was going on too long. So this is the first subterranean train tunnel in the world. It was built in 1844, and it is here in New York. So London likes to talk about how they were the first to have underground rapid transit. Yes, they were. Their system opened in 1870. But we had the first subterranean tunnel, and this was built under Atlantic Avenue in downtown Brooklyn. And it was part of a network from a train company known as the Brooklyn-Jamaica Railroad, which was the precursor to the Long Island Railroad. And the idea was people would take a ferry from Lower Manhattan across to the base of Atlantic Avenue and board a train that would run about 3,000 feet under Atlantic Avenue out east. Then they would take that train all the way out to the North Fork of Long Island, and then they would get on a boat and then continue service up to Boston. Lightning speeds of about 62-hour trip. And of course, that was considered like, woohoo, that was great back then. This was rediscovered by a man by the name of Bob Diamond in 1981. He was listening to the Cosgrove Report and heard about how John Wilkes Booth had buried some pages of a book somewhere in an underground tunnel. By the way, this tunnel only lasted about 10 years. I think by 1854, they were already deciding to seal it up. And there is the only depiction I could find of it besides actually being in it, which I was. I was very lucky. I was one of the last few to go through with Bob Diamond before the FDNY shut him down. Um, Bob Diamond still thinks there is a 1935 locomotive sealed up in a wall down there. He said it when we were down there, and he said it again. It's one of the most unique tours I'd ever been on because you had to go into the tunnel through a manhole in the center of Atlantic Avenue. You had to wait for the light to change. It was absolutely incredible. And you signed a bunch of paperwork saying that if you broke a leg or if you died, it wasn't his fault. Great. Anyway, so in chronological order, the next system that was attempted, and there were a bunch, and we have elevated lines I am not going to cover because that could be 3 other talks about the elevated lines that ran through Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens. We're going to talk about the pneumatic system by Alfred Eli Beach, which Untapped wrote a great article on yesterday that was published. I will go through it quickly, but you can find a lot of great information there on it after this talk. And so Alfred Eli Beach was actually a publisher. At the age of 18, he took over a publication of Scientific American, which is a journal magazine still on the newsstands today, both digitally and I still believe it is in print as well. And he published an idea for pneumatic train travel underground. He actually took the patent out. He was a patent officer on Duane Street and Broadway. And he was a scientist, he was a tinkerer, and he was also sort of a self-made kind of guy. And he took the patents out on pneumatics with the idea of using them for train travel, but actually using it for sort of like mail tubes, which I know is a fascination of our founder, Michelle's. So what he did was he went to the city and he tried to sell them on it. And at the time, the city was run by a very corrupt political machine known as Tammany Hall, and William Boss Tweed, you may have heard of him. Literally and figuratively, the fat cat of New York City corruption at the time, rotund man, about 350 pounds, realized that because Beach held the patent, he wasn't going to be making a lot of money off of this. So he stymied Beach, but Beach, not to be deterred, decided he was going to build a test tunnel. And the test tunnel, it ran about a little over 100 feet or so between Murray and Warren Street. Not to be outdone, this is a daguerreotype, one of the only photographs that we have of the Beach process from around 1870. He rented the street level and basement level of 258 Broadway, which was a department store by the name of Devlin's at the time. He hollowed out the basement and he built this very nice looking station with mosaic brickwork, statuary. There was a fountain, there was a grand piano and a grand piano player playing at all times. You got a couple guys in the cover of night to hide from the city. And in a little less than about 2 months, he tunneled this 100-foot tunnel between Murray and Warren, built the car, and opened up a spectacle, which he charged 25 cents for in 1870, which is not a cheap amount of money at the time. 400,000 people joined him. They went just for the thrill of it all. He served sandwiches and food when people got there. It was like an event. And people loved it. So it was a fan blower. It was a giant fan that was run by steam, which would create air pressure to push the tube, push the car through the tube. And then what it would do, it would reverse and vacuum and take the car back to the station. So one of my favorite stories about the whole process is it's a 100-foot tunnel, literally between Murray and Warren, which is not a very long walk on the tour. We actually go down to City Hall on the RW and walk the path. It's painfully short. What he would do is he had a guy on the Murray Street side, the opposite side, in a top hat with a bell, and he'd ring a bell every time the car got there and say Murray Street, like there was any other subway stop in the continent that anybody could go to, and then they blow them, their vacuum suck them back. I love that. So what happened is after Alfred Eli Beach abandoned the process, it ran from about 1870 to 1873. New York had a financial panic in 1873, close to the Great Depression. Nobody was investing in infrastructure. Tweed was actually put on trial for corruption, mainly because of the Tweed Courthouse, which is right near this spot. And the current powers that be actually wanted to invest in it, but nobody else was. So it got abandoned. Alfred Eli Beach but built this tunnel, spent a lot of money on this tunnel, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Some of it was his own money. So he decided he was going to try to recoup his losses by repurposing it twice, either as a wine cellar, and then later on people would go down there and shoot guns. It was like a shooting range under Broadway. These photos, very rare, very not seen very much at all, came from the New York Transit Museum archives when I was putting the tour together. This was from the Brooklyn Manhattan Transit Company's prospecting trip in 1912 under Broadway. And you'll see here that this is the sealed up wall under 258 Broadway, which would have led to Beach's Station. It is reported that the rotting wood at the base of the track is actually the grand piano, because they could not get the grand piano out and it was left to rot down there. So says the New York Times. This is the facing Murray Street. You could see the rotting track at the time. And here's my favorite, because as much as things change, they stay the same. The prospectors found Beach's, they broke through the wall and found Beach's car rotting. What do? They took selfies in it. Right there, look at these guys. They were so proud of themselves. And then, of course, everything was destroyed. The only physical remnant, so I have been told, of this entire process is the shield that Alfred Ely Beach used. Apparently, it was up at Cornell, but nobody up at Cornell can seem to find it. He actually ordered the shield from Europe to hold the street up as he was doing the tunneling process. But that is lost to time, apparently, according to Cornell, but hopefully they'll find it. And this was sort of a grander I like to call it a steampunky vision for what elevated rapid transit would have looked like right around the same time. Obviously, this is running down Broadway past Trinity. I always like to say on the tour, this is when I make the joke, Elon Musk, eat your heart out, because of course, the Hyperloop is sort of basing itself on technology that Alfred Ely Beach was using back in the 1870s. So why do we have a subway system in New York? Well, we certainly were not the first. We actually weren't even the first in America. Boston had a little bit of an underground system before we did. What we had was a great blizzard, which was called the Great Blizzard of 1888. Here's a picture of it. They say it was somewhere around 40 inches of snow. It came in March. It came very quickly and paralyzed New York for weeks, something on par of the great snowpocalypse of, I believe it was 2008, was it? But people couldn't get out of their homes. Carriages were not running down the streets. And what we had were the elevateds, which you're seeing pictured here, and they were frozen solid too. And the city said, enough is enough. We need underground transit. London has it, Budapest has it, Paris has it, Boston has it. We need it. So who do they tag in 1888 right after? Oh, and here's actually a shot from Harper's. Look at all of these poor souls having to walk over the bridge in the Great Blizzard of 1888 with the train sort of just trudging along over the Brooklyn Bridge. The Great Transportation Problem, they called it. I love it. So who do they peg? This guy, Alexander Ector Orr, Irish immigrant. He comes from Ireland poor. He marries rich, which is always a good tactic. And you could tell by those austere chops that Alexander Ector Orr gets the job done. He was head of the Grains and Produce Commission. And then he gets tagged by the mayor at the time to become head of the Rapid Transit Commission. Now, very important distinction. Rapid transit in literally 1900, when the system begins, is not public. It is private. It's private enterprise. His job was to find this guy, August Belmont Jr., who then got together a consortium of investors to start the company known as the Interborough Rapid Transit Company, which I will affectionately refer to as the IRT from now on. IRT, for those of you who ride the New York City subway, will know this is number trains. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 are all built on IRT track, some of which even on the footprints of the 1904 stations, which we'll talk about in a second. So Belmont Jr. brought in his architects of choice, Hines and Lafarge, who were already at work on St. John the Divine Cathedral up in Morningside Heights, which was also a Belmont enterprise. He put in money for that as well. So what they're doing is they're taking these Beaux Arts architects and they're bringing them underground. And I know some of you are probably saying, what? Beaux Arts architecture in the subway? But it's there. We'll talk about it. So this is groundbreaking day in 1901, City Hall Park. You may know that fountain if you know City Hall. One of the reasons why I love this picture is you can tell off the bat that this work is going to be done by manpower. Pickaxes, shovels, sometimes explosives, donkeys, horses, carts. That's how we did this. And when I tell you how long it took to build the first 28 stations on the line, you'll be amazed. The two buildings in the four on the left-hand side are still on Park Row today. One of them, which is now Pace University, the first building, was for a time the headquarters of the New York Times, right before the New York Times was going to move up to the old Paps Hotel, which will become Times Square. Now, actually, Times Square, the subway system actually beats the New York Times up there, not only by a couple of months. And the president of the Times actually says to Belmont and the IRT, do me a favor, don't call your station 42nd Street, or at the time it was known as Longacre Square, call it Times Square because we're moving up there. Again, here's another shot of the horses and the carts. By the way, that fountain is not where the fountain is today. Where the fountain is today is the building all the way in the back. You'll see there's a portion of the building which was the old post office. That post office was demolished in 1939. It was called the Monster. People hated it. So when they got rid of it, they recreated City Hall Park, which was on the footprint of New York Common. Here's an aerial shot of City Hall wrapping around City Hall Park, and you'll see under Park Row, they're building the tunnel system, which is going to become part of City Hall Loop, which we'll talk about in a minute. Now, if you look at the back of this picture, sort of back center, you're going to see a trench, a curved trench. That is going to become City Hall Station, the mythic City Hall Station. That's them digging it right now. So this actually, that large building is the Monster Post Office. And again, that curve is going to become City Hall Station. And I like this picture because it demonstrates how the original subway system was built, which was a system known as cut and cover. Does exactly what it sounds like. It opens the ground up, it goes down as far as it needs to go, and then it follows behind it, covering up the ground to make it viable for surface use again. Very simple system. The original IRT system was only about 30 feet underground, not as deep as the subsequent subway systems that come later. Here's a ground level shot of cut and cover in the City Hall region. Again, this is basically, again, the turn that is going to become part of City Hall Loop. I love this picture because this is up around 17th Street. This is cut and cover. And what I love to tell people on the tour is, especially if they're New Yorkers, remember when that 10-year period when 2nd Avenue was a mess from the Q extension and businesses were failing? Well, as you can see back in the early 1900s, building the original Interborough Rapid Transit line, a lot more elegant. People were able to sort of use the street and you were able to access businesses at the time. These are guys cementing the approach walls that I believe they are the approach walls to Union Square, 14th Street. You can see just how shallow they are underground. That's daylight coming down from street level above them. Before they started pumping Wi-Fi and phone service into the system, you could actually sometimes get ambient cell service down in the original rapid IRT stations. So there is New York's first subway map by the Interborough Rapid Transit, 1904. What you're seeing on that map is mainly the island of Manhattan. The blue lines represented are the elevated lines which were already in place at the time. The red line is the first trunk line that started at City Hall, went up to Grand Central, which was a station at the time. It was in the process of becoming the terminal we know today. It uses what we know today as the shuttle line to go to Times Square, and then jogs its way up the west side on what we know today as the 1, 2, and 3 line. So the first original Interborough line was a mishmash of the 4, 5, 6 and the 1, 2, and 3. For those of you who don't know the numbers too well, to give you a better designation, green line up to Grand Central turns into red line. Here's opening day. Now this photo works very well when I'm standing in City Hall Park and I can hold it right up against that exact view. It is opening day. You see City Hall is dressed up in bunting. This was like a holiday for New York. People came out, they took the day off. People wanted to ride the system because this was new. This was a new turn in New York City transportation. 150,000 people came out that day to ride the trains. By day 4, 400,000 people were coming. So it opened on a Thursday. By Sunday, they were packing picnic lunches and lined up down Broadway waiting 3 hours just to get into the system. Now, the first couple of days, that's fun and cute. That does not get fun and cute when people are trying to commute. And that's actually what happens, but we'll talk about that in a second. This is a photo of the very first subway train ride for the subway forefathers. That man front and center, literally in the center there, that is August Belmont Jr. The guy with the chops next to him, that's Alexander Ector Orr. These are the city forefathers at the time. This is not what an original subway car looked like. I'll show you the first subway cars. This was a special sort of cattle car that they got to inspect the entire line on. Could you imagine if that was the subway car? Here is a colorized sepia postcard of opening day of City Hall. As you could see, everybody in their hats came and got on that platform. They packed that platform, and there is an original train pulling in around that corner. Oh, so here comes the video. So enjoy the off-brand sounds of what sounds like the Entertainer, but it's not. This is a little video snippet of what it was to approach Grand Central in 1905. Look at how everybody's dressed. Wait till you see the window. Also notice the no smoking sign. Interesting. Okay. There we go. Nope, got to do it again. Okay, so one of the things you may have noticed in that photo is everybody dresses well to go into the subway, but also that train car was massively shorter than the platform that it pulled into at Grand Central at the time. You also may have noticed that is not the same platform that the 456 pulls into at Grand Central today. That is actually where the shuttle at Grand Central pulls into today. But what happened was the first interborough rapid transit cars were only about 4 to 5 train cars long. The train sets were very short. And some of the original stations were only built 200 feet to accommodate those train cars. And when the original cars could only fit about 60 to 70 people in them, that was not working for the hundreds of thousands of people who wanted to ride the subway. So what do New Yorkers love to do? They love to complain. And here is a political cartoon. I believe this is from the Herald a couple of months into service. You'll see it says Interborough rattled transit. The trains run at the company's convenience, and 3 hours to Harlem. That trip from City Hall up to 145th Street was supposed to take 26 minutes. Nope, didn't happen that way. So back to City Hall and the loop, what you're going to see, this is a schematic of the area, and that loop that you're seeing at the left-hand side of the diagram is the loop that runs right in front of City Hall under City Hall Park. What you're seeing there is at the arm, that is the mythical and lovely City Hall Station, which has been decommissioned since 1945. And what you'll notice about it is it's built on a turn. It's built on a curve, and it's only designed to hold those original 5-car train sets, which is why one of the many reasons why this station no longer is considered viable by the system after the subway unifies in 1940, and they decide to shut it down, making it one of the most desired spots in New York City today to get into. More on that in a second. There is one of the original 5-car train sets, the IRT trains. Now, one of the things you'll notice about these trains are they're very pretty looking, they're very elegant, but they only have doors on the extreme left and right sides, which means getting in and out of them was a nightmare, because you had to bunch up at the end of the cars to get off. And so when they would pull into stations like City Hall, they'd come up on their sides, and you would see people bunching in and jumping over these gaps to get into the trains. That is a picture of City Hall. I'm going to show you a postcard from 1905 of that happening. That is City Hall today. As a matter of fact, that was a little while ago. City Hall, the leaded glass in those portals is decaying very quickly, unfortunately. That's the mezzanine level of City Hall. So Rafael Guastavino, who if anybody knows me very well knows I am a huge nerd for, He was called in to do the station because it was built on that turn and they needed to build it on support arches instead of I-beam pillars. There's the postcard. So you see everybody sort of just bunched up at one end, getting into that train, and the train's turned in on its side. They're also getting in at the end where the gap is the smallest. And again, very, very gorgeous station. Rafael Guastavino and Sons at their best, but it was not very viable, which is why in 1945 they shut it down. Also one platform station, meaning it only goes uptown, doesn't go downtown. And everybody was just using Brooklyn Bridge City Hall, which was right next door and still in use today. Those were the kiosks to get in. So the original Interborough Rapid Transit Company, most of their 28 originals had these lovely kiosks, cast iron, done by the Heckler Company out in Williamsburg. And they were designed almost exactly off of the Budapest models, of the Budapest Metro. They were all ripped out in 1940, by the way, and I know people will say, well, but what about Astor Place? Astor Places was rebuilt in the 1980s when they redid Astor. It just looks very old. So then we head over to the municipal building. One of the fascinating things about the municipal building is this is the first building ever to have a subway station built into its foundation. This is also the first Beaux Arts high-rise done by McKim, Mead & White. And one of the things you just have to be on the tour to experience is the scale of this building. It's incredible. You walk through this colonnade on Center Street, and you walk into this absolutely impressive, it's almost like Mount Olympus, entryway into municipal offices. Like what? Like why? That's because this building was not supposed to be just municipal offices. It was supposed to be the gateway to a much larger transportation hub known as the Manhattan Transportation Center, which if you look through that beautiful atrium way or that archway through the center of the building, it's absolutely gorgeous. It leads to nowhere today. One PP, like One Police Plaza, which was built much later and is an awful looking building, just my opinion. What was supposed to be behind it was another Grand Central Terminal type terminal building, which was going to provide regional access, hook up to Brooklyn Bridge access for trolley car, streetcar, and then the subway under the municipal building. The only thing we got was the municipal building and the subway. And of course, this is the entrance, and it's one of the most stunning entrances into the subway system. Again, that's Guastavino, vaulted arches, beautifully looks out over the Brooklyn Bridge. Nobody uses this because it leads to the Jay-Z on Chambers Street. You can connect over via tunnel to 456 City Hall, but most people don't even know this exists, and it's a really, really beautiful, beautiful entrance. Ridership stats on Chambers Street, Jay-Z, about 5,000 to 6,000 people on any given rush hour. You move across the street to Brooklyn Bridge City Hall on the 456, and you've got 100,000 people using it because the Jay-Z doesn't really go anywhere in Manhattan. It kind of comes in for a couple stops, turns, and goes back out again. And then you go downstairs and you realize, now this is an older photo. Right now they are doing construction work, capital improvement down there. They are putting in elevator shafts to make it handicap accessible. This is why I love New York. There were elevator shafts there when they built the building in 1917, and then they ripped them out in the 1940s, only to put them back in. So why not pay twice? What you notice when you get down there are 5 platforms, only 2 of which are being used today. And this was considered to be one of the Grand Central of downtown for subways because hundreds of thousands of people were using this stop in the 19 teens and 20s. For a very short time, they were offering Eastern Long Island service for a while from one of these platforms. And this became sort of a huge transit hub. It's one of the highest and widest stations in the system. And you get down there and you realize it's just a forest of these support pillars because they're holding up the building upstairs. And for a while, although most of it I think has been removed, hope not, but we'll see. There used to be the old IRT Lexington Avenue signage and the old BMT signage. So this was the hub of the second system known as the Brooklyn Manhattan Transit Company, which I'll talk about in 1 second. So it was originally going to be called Brooklyn Bridge. So the owners of the Brooklyn Manhattan Transit Company considered this to be their showpiece terminal at the time. It was a terminal until 1930. So they paid for these gorgeous mosaics to depict the Brooklyn Bridge. Couple of problems, one of which is right before they opened it, They decided to change the name to Chambers Street. I'll tell you why in a second. And then they looked at this, they came down and they said, that could be any bridge anywhere in America. That's not the Brooklyn Bridge because that bridge is missing something very subtle. Now, Michelle and I pulled the stats on how many people have taken this tour. I think we're at around 7,000. I haven't given all of the tours personally myself, but for years, as I've been giving this tour, I always ask people, what's missing? To date, 9 people have guessed it. What's missing? Give you a second. Somebody just chatted and I wonder if they see it. You're missing the second set of radiating supporting cables that give the Brooklyn Bridge that spider web iconic shape to it. You'll also maybe spot that right under it is a little Statue of Liberty. They're really beautiful. They're still there. Most of them are covered up. There's one spot. Reason why it was going to be called Brooklyn Bridge, these are covered up right now, the ones that you're looking at. That was a de-embarking platform. I believe they're being covered up to be protected, not removed. That's what I've been told. So there is a ramp. If you go to the end of the platform and look out into the dark tunnel, you'll see a shaft of light that shines down into the tunnel. That was direct connection to the Brooklyn Bridge. Of course, the Brooklyn Manhattan Transit Company wanted to have subway service over the bridge. They were going to build a very steep ramp to turn up and left onto the bridge, but they abandoned it because it just wasn't going to work physically. The ramp had to be too much at a pitch to be safe. And also they were scared the Brooklyn Bridge was not going to be able to handle subway cars because it was already dealing with train traffic on it till 1954. What they didn't know is the Brooklyn Bridge would have been fine. Now, when we get to municipal building, that's when we enter the system on the tour. And what I like to tell people is when we first entered the system in the 1900s, we did not use tokens, we used tickets. And this was a ticket chopper. You'd buy a ticket from an attendant, you'd walk to the gate, and there would be a guy at this device chopping your ticket and letting you in. You could imagine how painfully long this process took. Here's a picture. I think this is 110th Street on the IRT. You'll see the ticket chopper and the attendant right there. And these were the old gates, so no turnstile. You just had a gate and then the ticket chopper and then in you went. Now, rush hour, this was a nightmare. It's like, could you imagine waiting on those steps while some guy's chopping your ticket and the trains are just flying by? I would have an aneurysm. This is what the ticket looked like at the time. Interborough Rapid Transit, 5 cents, done by the Hamilton Bank. It was a Hamilton Bank note. This is from the Museum of the City of New York. They have this on display. That's what your ticket looked like. And then in 1921, they announced no more standing in line, featherweight pressure gate, which of course we know as the turnstile. And this was a game changer. Because subway fare was 5 cents, these were rigged to take nickels. Subway fare was going to be 5 cents from 1904 to 1940. Yes, you heard me right. 1904 to 1940, they never raised the fare. Yep. They raise the fare, every 2.5 to 3 years now, but it took a nickel and it went, and then you walked right through the gate, saved a lot more time. 1940, they raised the fare to 10 cents, and they were rigged to take dimes. 1953, they had to raise the fare to 15 cents. We don't have a 15-cent coin. What do they invent? But subway tokens. And of course, here are a couple of mints of the subway tokens throughout the years. Some of you on this talk may have subway tokens. I had a bag of them from the 1990s, from when I was in college and just starting out teaching. The day that they stopped using them, I had a whole bunch left over. I bring some of them on the tour. Now we use Metro cards. They say someday they'll phase out the Metro card, but I'm not sure when that will be. A couple of years. They're trying that Omni system in select stations today. This is a map from the second system known as the Brooklyn Manhattan Transit Company, and they were brought on very briefly just to alleviate some of the ridership woes that the IRT was experiencing because the IRT couldn't handle them. The BMT comes on with the city from Brooklyn. Why? Because Brooklyn had its own rapid transit company from the 1860s and 70s, mainly to service Coney Island. Brooklyn itself was a very large city before it becomes part of Greater New York. BMT lines that we would know today, anything yellow, so NQRW and the J and the Z. So my favorite. Now, what happened was in the mid-century, the IRT decided they had to extend all of their cars to 10-car train sets from the 5. So the original Hines and Lafarge Beaux-Arts stations, which were about 200 feet long, needed to be extended. The best place to see this mid-century initiative, which went on for 20 years, is Spring Street on the uptown side, because there's literally a line in the wall between 1904 and probably the late 1950s, which you could tell by that avocado green tile, which my grandmother in her old kitchen still has a refrigerator that has that color. There's a lot of other ways that you could tell, though, one of which is, and there's that line again, obviously you see the font, sans serif, more modern from the later editions. What you're going to see as you move into the old Hines and Lafarge, you're going to see the mosaics, you're going to see the fayances, the architectural moldings. The ceilings are going to get a lot higher because daylight used to get in there. This is what a Hines and Lafarge original faience looked like. A faience is a station emblem plaque, double fire glazed terracotta, mainly done by the Gruby Company at the time. The S was for spring. So they either put numbers if it was a number street or the beginning of the name of the street. Why? 30% of the city's population in 1904 couldn't read. So you needed a symbol in which they could identify the station. And they were also color coded. So blue mainly, I believe because of water, but don't quote me on that. And you'll see Hines and Lafarge loved flowers. So those are poppy flowers around the S because poppies were rumored to grow in that area before the urbanization of the area, and then the tulip moldings at the top. So this is where the old sort of Beaux-Arts architecture comes into the system. This is a shot of Spring Street from 1905 before you get the extension. You could see where the wall is right there. And of course, Hines and Lafarge made sure that light got into every one of the original 28 stations using poured glass block on the sidewalk above. And you can see the fayances right there, all those elements. So we go up to 14th Street. Again, look at how high 14th Street is. Also, look at how light 14th Street is with the light coming down. You've got those guys. This is, I believe, 1905 as well on 14th Street. Before the BMT makes their connection on the other side, this is what 14th Street looked like. Then, of course, in 1917, you've got the BMT connecting to 14th Street Union Square, making it, even today, the second busiest hub in the system. Now, I love 14th Street, and we have a special guest who's going to speak a little bit about this in 2 seconds. But 14th Street is very well populated, very well used. And you get there and you don't realize that there is a station-wide art installation put in there by Arts in Transit in the early 2000s, from the late 90s to the early 2000s. An artist by the name of Mary Miss came in. And she had been recognizing, when she went down there to sort of prospect the station, she noticed that the engineers and the architects were sort of red spray painting things that needed attention in the renovation. And she said, I got it, that's my idea. Red steel frames all over the station, which inside of them, they have little messages, things that you should be looking at through the purview of the frames. There are 120, I know a couple have been recently removed. I believe there's 125-ish, all over Union Square, and they are awesome. There's Mary. I used Mary's headshot, Aaron. I hope you don't mind. So what she did was, her idea was not only to call upon the infrastructure of the station, which we were seeing in the picture before, but also to freeze certain parts of the station in time, which you're seeing in these corners down to the NQRW. Those are the original 1917 walls and mosaics framed in, they're almost like temporal riffs, against the late 1990s renovation wall. And of course, the centerpiece is the old Hines and Lafarge wall with the eagle fayances from 14th Street, broken up into 6 pieces. And this is a really great spot for us to see not only how narrow that passage was before the 90s when it was blown out, but also to appreciate just how ornate and beautiful those original Hines and Lafarge walls were. And it gives us a really unique view of the strata of what made an old subway wall up. It's almost like a layer cake there, really cool. So Aaron Assis, who you may have joined for our first talk, Aaron is a photographer, he is an artist. He also works very closely with Mary, he works in her studio. So I just asked Aaron to say a few things about Mary and Mary's motivation here. So Aaron, go for it.
Please, thank you. I think the only things I really want to add are just the kind of the essence of Mary's work and how she really challenges us to pay attention to the details of the city in real space and in real time. So one of the really cool things walking through Union Square is appreciating how works of art can really help us kind of combine different narratives. And I think as it pertains to this virtual tour, looking at art as a way not just to sort of call attention to what's going on, but also to highlight components of history. And I think here it also really serves to show how art can be a really active part of bettering our experiences in these stations and in these spaces. And these photos are particularly interesting because one of the stories I really like to tell whenever I'm talking about this work in the station is how, Justin, go back to the wall.
Front or back? This one?
Yeah, yeah. Or one more. So I think one of the things that's really cool about an image like this is when Mary was brought in addition to exploring the station, looking for opportunities to inspire, planting the messages in all of the steel frames, is her curiosity and just her pursuit of developing this art project challenged her to challenge the architect to save facets of this wall. And in that conversation, they realized that they had all this extra space behind the wall that they could enlarge the corridor. So in addition to highlighting historical things, in addition to inspiring you as you pass through and giving you a chance to sort of slow down and look around, in this particular case, like the art spirit or the creative ethos of Mary's work really helped create a better circulation path. So it's art really doing a lot of different things, highlighting history, making experience better, and actually having a utilitarian benefit here. So I think that I sort of really respect and want to add that sort of piece to this talk about Mary's work, is that not all art is superficial. Sometimes it really gets into the spirit of your experience, and sometimes it can actually better your improvements in the system when you invite artists into projects like these. And in this particular case, again, it really, really saved some really beautiful historic components of the station. So I see a couple cool questions. I think, Justin, I will leave those back to you, but it's an honor and a pleasure to work with Mary on a daily basis. And I think that this type of work is unique. And whenever we are comfortable or allowed, I invite everybody to go in and check it out for themselves, because you could literally spend 45 minutes, an hour just walking through the station and finding all these treasures.
Cool. Yeah, and what we'll do, Aaron, is if I'm not seeing the questions at the moment, but at the Q&A, we'll unmute you so you can answer anything that might be Mary specific. We're going to keep going. We have a couple more minutes left. Aaron and I also do subway art, which this is also featured on. We may do a virtual talk of this. This is Mary's favorite, by the way. She loved the colors in the mosaic of the exit to street sign from 1917 and sort of, again, froze it right in time. So I always like to show this on the tours because Mary has admitted it's her favorite in the station. So one of the things we don't realize is in the initiative to extend the stations, certain stations from the original 28 became superfluous and are shut down, but are ghosts on the station today. 18th Street between 14 and 23 is one of those stations. This is a shot of 18th Street from around 1904. Very gorgeous. You can see here this from track level at 18th Street. And again, daylight coming down into 18th Street. And this is what 18th Street looks like today. So it's abandoned, it's dark, it's on the line. It is a treasure trove for very adventurous photographers who want to walk the track to get there. There is no street access to 18th or the other station I'm going to talk about, which is Worth. But you can see here, I'm just briefly giving you some postcard shots of original stations. Here's 23rd Street. Again, you could see how elegant these stations were designed. One of the things Hines and Lafarge never wanted you to feel was like you were underground. They wanted to get the day down into the station itself. Another shot of 23rd Street. You go into some of these original stations, what you'll notice are the old moldings in the ceiling are still existed. They've been painted about 7,000 times, but you can see them. And the tour stops at Astor. So this is Astor Place. The faience at Astor is a beaver, and I always, again, quiz my tour why. The Astor family got their start of their riches in fur trading, and we're at Astor Place. So what's really interesting about Astor Place is Astor Place was one of the first stations in the system to receive the benefit of Arts and Transit in 1985. That is a Milton Glaser painted enamel piece that he put in. A couple of reasons why. Milton Glaser was a Cooper Union alum, right above the head of Astor Place. What you can see if you look at the original faience in the top corner, he did a play on the Heinz and Lafarge faience in the painted enamel. Milton Glaser, by the way, if you don't know the name, you probably know the I Heart New York logo from the mid-1980s. He designed that. He also designed the Brooklyn Lager logo, which he did not get paid for. He just said to the guys who started Brooklyn Lager, do me a favor, just give me ownership in the company. That was a very smart move, Milton Glaser. Clinton Hall, so one of the reasons why we stop at Astor, it's the showpiece of the original line, but also it has a sealed up door on the downtown side, which used to lead to Clinton Hall, was sealed up in the 1940s, but the door, you could still see the shape there. Where did it lead to? It led to Clinton Hall. Before it was Clinton Hall, it was the Astor Place Opera House, a site of one of the worst riots, besides the draft riots in New York, which were the Astor Place Opera House riots, or the Opera House riots, where the working classes sort of came out against the upper privileged classes. The symbol was who could play Macbeth better. Was it the British gentlemen who came over from Britain, which were the upper crusty Fifth Avenue types were saying could, or was it the American, who I believe his name was Edward McCready, who the lower working and immigrant classes basically said, we're behind this guy. And the whole idea was, who rules us, Americans or British? And it becomes Clinton Hall, which was a mercantile library, but before that it becomes sort of a gentleman's business club where gentlemen could meet. And then it becomes condos, which are connected into Astor Place via that door. But in the 1940s, as they unify the line, they don't want access directly into the building anymore, so they seal it up. Now, my favorite story about Astor is Wanamaker's. Wanamaker's, a huge department store in Philadelphia, put their satellite store inside Astor Place, which is, if any of you know Astor Place well, drum roll please, Kmart, and still is Kmart today. And everybody thinks Kmart came later. No, Astor Place was built with a department store entrance in it. As a matter of fact, this map you're looking at was the very first subway map published. Wanamaker's, in a pamphlet, put out a map. And at Astor Place, it says that's where Wanamaker's is. You'll also see 18th Street is there, Worth Street is there, and 91st Street is there, all of which is not there anymore. At close-up shot, this is people walking in and out on the downtown platform. I want you to notice that set of stairs. That set of stairs actually led to a connecting tunnel under the train tracks to lead you to the uptown side. It is gone now. This is what it looks like. But if you look on the flooring, you'll see the outline in the front left hand of the picture. That's where the old stairs used to be. And of course, where the Kmart window was Wanamaker's. So very quickly before I wrap up, Worth Street is one of the stations that we actually see on the tour because we pass through it. This is Worth Street. This was in between Brooklyn Bridge, City Hall, and Canal. And when they extended Brooklyn Bridge, City Hall North, and Canal South, Worth Street became very superfluous. But they invested all of the money in extending it. This is a picture of the gas lines. They had to reroute the gas lines to do the extensions in the 1940s. So this is a picture of a rerouted gas line. This is the extension before it's been finished with tile. This is the extension when it has been refinished with the tile. And this is, I believe, early 1950s, 51. And you'll see that ghost of a man traveling through. He's not a ghost, he's probably an overexposure. And here is the New York Times article from the day that they shut down Worth Street. They claimed it was going to end the jams because, as you could see, Worth Street was very close to Brooklyn Bridge City Hall. It was causing a lot of traffic backups. And of course, this is what Worth Street looks like today. And Worth Street is a really great opportunity for us to see a GO station on the downtown side. It's very long. I bring a flashlight, shine the flashlight out the train, which is so much fun because all of New Yorkers who are not on the tour usually start shouting out expletives like, F no. And I was like, yeah, no, it's there. It is. It's cool. Everybody loves it. There's another shot of Worth Street. And then, of course, quickly, the third line after the BMT, of the IRT, the BMT, and in the late 1920s, we get the IND, the independent city-owned line that comes in. This is when the city has their eye on unifying in 1940, all of the train lines under the city banner. The IND lines that we know and love today, BDF, ACE. And lastly, in the 1970s to sort of reverse years of decline in the system. One of the things that the Metropolitan Transit Authority does is they try to artfully figure out how to unify all of the signage from these three disparate companies over a very long period of time. So they bring in Italian graphic designer Massimo Vignelli. If you are interested in signage or typeface, watch the 2005 documentary Helvetica. You can get it on YouTube for free. Massimo Vignelli is interviewed quite extensively about his work doing the New York City signage. He uses Helvetica everywhere, which we still use today. We use his template. This is the 1971 template. You could see a lot of similarities and a lot of differences in this test chart. And of course, what Vignelli is most remembered for is the subway map, which pissed everybody off because although it is artfully designed, also it's not a map, as Vignelli will tell you, it's a diagram. So it's not supposed to be geographically accurate. It's one of my favorites, but it is extremely hard to read and not geographically accurate. But he said that was never the point. But watch Helvetica because he defends himself very well, I think. So just to leave you, I've got a really great story, one of which is I just want you to hear, if you haven't been on the subway recently, I actually played this video yesterday and got a little weepy because I haven't been on the subway since March 12th, which for me is like throwing a guy out on the desert with no water and no sight of water at all. I ride the subway multiple times a day. I do this tour multiple times a week. So this is what the new automated sounds of the newer trains sound like when the doors are closing.
Stand clear of the closing doors, please.
So that is a guy named Charlie Pellet. Charlie Pellet is a New Yorker, actually. He's not like one of those people you hear that are sitting in a room somewhere in North Dakota. He is a New Yorker who had a friend who said they were auditioning voices for the subway up in the MTA offices in the Bronx. He went up, he did it, and he got the job. And he is the guy you hear when there is a delay or when the doors are closed. So this tour, our underground subway tour, is given by, I believe, almost 10 different guides now, multiple times a week. And Mandy Edgecombe was the first person I actually trained to give this tour. And she was leading a subway tour going through City Hall Loop when she came upon Charlie Pellet on the tour. And so she had Charlie Pellet quick do a video with her. She said it was one of the best days of her lives, one of the best tours she'd ever been on. So here he is. Wait, where'd it go? Come on. There you go.
Hi, this is Charlie Pellet. I'm with Mandy, and yes, it's true. I'm the stand clear of the closing doors guy. But Mandy, you know what? Can you do it? You do it better than I do. Give it a try.
Stand clear of the closing doors, please.
You're not bad. Thank you so much. My pleasure meeting you.
So that being said, stand clear of the closing doors, please. Our virtual tour has ended. And I thank you all very much for joining us. Q&A is happy to start. I see there's a bunch in the chat. I still haven't read the chat. And there we go. Gratuity, I am not accepting gratuity. We are accepting it as a whole. So we've got untapped.com/tips, I believe, or PayPal info@untappedcities.com. But I thank you for joining me regardless. It is always my pleasure to talk about the subway system. All right, Michelle, I'm going to leave it to you.
Yeah, so we had a question earlier from Jack about when they eliminated trains over the Brooklyn Bridge.
1954, Jack. That's they shut everything down and demolished those really beautiful depots at either side of the bridge. There's one on Sand Street in Brooklyn and one right next to the municipal building.
And then Stephen earlier asked if the pieces of the wall in the Union Square station by Mary Miss are in their original positions, or were they moved there as part of the reconfiguration?
Good question. Aaron, you can jump in if you want. My understanding was they are in the original position, but they are supported. So they're not just sitting there willy-nilly. They have to be supported by like rods or something, right? Aaron, is that true?
Yeah, as far as I know too. And the red structure that highlights that wall, you notice it's about a foot proud of the original wall, and that was indicating where the wall was going to be furred out to for the renovation. So it would have made the corridor that much thinner, which is why that what that datum represents, the drop down to the ground.
Cool.
Great. Matthew Kingsley asks, is there a point in time when appropriate maintenance and upkeep stopped? One would think with the unbridled wealth of the 80s, there would be sufficient funds to do what is needed to be done.
That's an interesting question. So one of the things to realize, the system was 3 different companies until 1940. In 1940, the city laid down municipal bonds, hundreds of millions of dollars of municipal bonds to buy them, mainly because they wanted to take the thing over and get down the elevateds down the avenue. So from the 1940s into the 1970s, there was literally not a lot of money to keep up the system, which is why we get a continued decline in the upkeep of the system. So it was sort of sporadic. It wasn't until I believe the year, it was between 83 and 85 when the MTA made a really conscious choice to put money back into improving the system. And that came through, for those of us who remember the 80s, Koch's initiative to get rid of subway graffiti, which was huge. Again, Arts and Transit is incorporated, which was a wing of the MTA, to put permanent installations into the system to basically beautify the system. But they were doing it to stations that were lined up for renovation and restoration. So really, I think the 80s is really when it started. At other times, it was, 50s, 60s, and 70s. The only thing they were doing in the 50s, 40s, and 50s were extending the platforms to accommodate more ridership, as far as I know. I'm sure there's more, but that's what I know.
Justin, I'll say one thing. When I was covering the Transit Museum exhibit about Redbirds, there's a whole section about how they instituted new policies about keeping up their rolling stock in order to extend the life of them. And one of them is about stripping these cars all the way down and rebuilding from scratch the engine and everything. And that's why we see some very old trains that are still rolling, that you get in and you're like, why? Those are like the CE trains often, sometimes the A, and some of them were recently retired. But that was one way the city was able to still maintain during the financial crisis. So we may see that coming into play once again. Rich Praveed asks, are any glass ceiling tiles still there? Any thinking to restore all of them?
That's a really great question too. And again, people who join me on my tours know I'm also a nerd for glass block ceiling. There are no, as far as I know, and I am totally willing to be corrected on this by anybody who may know, there are no original glass block from the 1904 system. There are glass block which have been reinstated, like you go to Times Square and you'll see there's glass block above your head there. That was put in the 90s. Sort of as an homage, again, to Hines and Lafarge. There are some spots where you can see glass block on the floor cemented over. Also at Times Square, that's a good spot to do it. There was some at 28th Street. I believe when they renovated 28th Street, they may have covered it over, although I haven't done a deeper dive there since the renovation opened up again. But it was all cemented over in the 40s when they unified the system because they were going to provide better light. And one of the things about glass block is it's really great aesthetically, but it's really hard to maintain, especially with people walking over it all the time, which was one of the reasons why they decided as a system to get rid of it in the 40s.
And Justin, you had shown and briefly mentioned the glass blocks in the City Hall station, which are original, but are pretty bad shape.
Right.
And they're also darkened.
Yes.
So they were
there. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. Finish.
Yeah, sorry. So I know they were darkened for World War II, like Penn Station and Sonia Hotel. A lot of places were worried about being bombed, and a lot of that was not uncovered after World War II. So.
And if you join me on Thursday for the Once and Future Penn talk, we will talk a little bit about the glass ceiling, the glass block ceilings and flooring there, because some of that is visible.
It's also a random note about glass block, but when it's not properly maintained, a lot of the glass block from the turn of the century, or glass in general, had a tendency to turn a little bit purple over time. So that was also a contributor to it not letting quite the same volume of light through. Which
is actually how you know it's original. So if you go down to Times Square, the shuttle platform, you're going to see glass block cemented into the floor there where the old ticket booth used to be. And that glass block is purple.
Howard asks if the MTA ever used pushers during the peak of commuting service.
Oh, you mean like in Tokyo?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so.
the people who would, I don't know. That's a good question. I never came across that in my research, but in the very beginning, they probably could have used them because again, you've got, 4 to 5 car train sets, and those things were packed beyond what we even experience as being packed today. So they very well could have used pushers, but I'm not sure. I don't know. That's a good question. I'm going to look that up, Howard. You got me on a tangent now. Thank you.
Robert Morbeck asks if there's anything, he's interested in anything about the Freedom Tunnel, which we did show in Aaron's.
Oh, that's all Aaron's work there.
I guess what's the question?
Yeah, what do you want?
No, just I guess that was a comment, but Robert,
we could do a Freedom Tunnel.
Well, one of the nice parallels about the Freedom Tunnel is it runs almost entirely underneath Riverside Park, or at least the majority of it, and it's definitely a shallow tunnel cavity also. There's a lot of natural daylight that comes in. If you ever take a walk through Riverside Park and walk over the sidewalk decking, sometimes you can see down into the tunnel.
I have been in the Riverside Tunnel, not with Aaron, on a separate occasion. It's a pretty interesting place. So we can send you guys articles about that. Any last questions? All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We have another talk today at 2 p.m. and that is with the museum at Eldridge Street and the archivist with the Jewish Daily Forward. So we're excited about that. And then there are a lot of great events coming up next week as well. So see you guys all very soon. Thank you for all of the really nice comments we're seeing in the chat. We really appreciate all of your support. And thank you for Justin for donating your tips to us in terms of keeping our company going through this crisis. So looking forward to seeing everyone.
Thank you guys for joining me today. Hope you enjoyed.
Bye.
Bye.